So there's a YouTuber who goes by the name of Marchbaby. Recently, Marchbaby made a critical video of me, and at the beginning, he claims that he's going to take me down.
Today's video is going to be a bit of a darker subject because I want to take down some absolute lunatics.
I will leave it up to the audience to decide whether he managed to do that. This video is basically my attempt to dissect his points and claims just one clip at a time and then address them. But in case this is going to be too lengthy for you, I'm now going to summarize just briefly what my main problems are with his contribution. First of all, I think Marchbaby relies way too heavily on character assassination tactics, where instead of critiquing my message, he critiques me as the messenger. There are instances where he complains about my voice, where he complains about my thumbnails, he accuses me of being a map when I'm not one. And all of this seems to be a bit irrelevant to the question of whether I am in fact factually correct in my positions, and this is something I would be interested to talk about. I don't really care about this personal crap that much. Like, I'm not really into this drama shit that you apparently are, judging by the titles of your videos and their thumbnails. I'm more of a guy who's interested in the subject. In case you disagree with my positions, I'm all ears. You can explain why I'm incorrect about something, but you don't really succeed in that by just complaining about my thumbnails. You know, if you know what I'm saying. There are cases where he tries to address something I say, in fact, but he just ends up misparaphrasing me. There are cases where he just plainly strawmans me. He doesn't seem to understand even my most fundamental positions I hold in this subject. Like, one of them is this overarching theme that I have talked about across all my videos pretty much, that I don't believe it's a good idea to drive pedophiles underground through stigmatization, because it just makes it difficult for them to seek help, which means that we are jeopardizing children's welfare, innocent children's welfare, just because we need to be bigots for some reason. So anyway, this is just in a summary what I think about his contribution, which I personally think is kind of a worthless pile of shit.
This guy is a map, and if you don't know what a map is, it is a minor attracted person. Yeah, he's attracted to children. That's basically what it is.
What Marchbaby does here is spread misinformation. I'm not a map. I've specifically said I'm not a map in my videos, even though I'm sort of defending them in many occasions. Where Marchbaby gets his impression is probably from his subscriber or whoever it was that notified him about my content and asked whether he could do a video on me. But probably Marchbaby should still have confirmed whether there actually was one. Not that I really care that much either way, but you know.
If you want a more in-depth reasoning as what a map is, it's kind of the idea of making pedophiles more inclusive. That was the point of what they made maps for. It was a way to make it sound more inclusive.
To say that they wanted to make pedophiles more inclusive, or the word pedophile sound more inclusive, that doesn't really make sense. Like, the word inclusive is not applicable in that way. You could say something like they wanted society to be more inclusive of pedophiles. That would in fact be like correct language use. But then again, I think we can quite easily discern the real reasons why they wanted to introduce the word map. When you think about the word pedophile, you sort of have to concede that in many instances it's misunderstood, it's conflated with another term, the term of child molester, and they are not synonyms. Like, you can be attracted to children, that is the definition of pedophile, without acting on it. So that's like one of the reasons. But the second reason, which is as important, I would argue, is that the word pedophile, or the concept thereof, doesn't really encompass all people who are attracted to minors. Because if you're a pedophile, you're attracted to like younger children, all right? So we would need a new term anyway. And the word map, which comes from the words minor attracted person, is like an umbrella term, which also includes pedophiles, but it's not like limited to them.
But in reality, it's just an excuse to be like, hey, I want to fuck a child.
Well, I really don't think you need an excuse to have the feeling of being attracted to children in your head, because it's a feeling. It's really at most a thought crime, and I don't believe in thought crime. And also, now this might be a bit more difficult to grasp, but I think we can make a distinction between having that attraction and then that attraction transforming to a willingness to act it out, especially act it out in unethical ways. So I don't think it's factually correct to basically conceptualize pedophiles as people who want to fuck children. There are people who have an attraction to children, and not all of them really want to jeopardize children's welfare.
It speaks volumes when you get hundreds of views, but you only have 95 subs. Probably because majority of people think what you're posting is fucking disgusting garbage.
Now, the two videos Marchbaby shows there is, one of them is my response to some ordinary gamers who has 3.5 million subs, and then the other one is of course my response to Sean Head, who has 1.67 million subs. When I critique these big YouTubers, it's going to be in most cases the audience of those YouTubers who are going to discover my content, and they're not going to be pleased because I'm critiquing their favorite YouTuber. You just can't be very proud if you can't figure this out. And quite frankly, I'm happy this way. I feel I would be doing something wrong if Shoe Head fans would like my content, because I don't like Shoe Head. I despise her because she's a bigot and a dishonest fuck. So I think it's all fine, but you get, if you want to draw some weird interpretations because of the view numbers of those videos, again, like, all of this is completely irrelevant. If you think I'm wrong about some subject, please explain where the factual error is. It can't be too much asked if you're so against what I believe in to muster up a counter argument to something I say.
Before I get into this guy, I want to talk about an organization that this guy particularly likes, and that is going to be the Prostasia Foundation. If you want a brief description of what Prostasia is, it's supposed to be a child protection organization. That's what it looks like from the outside, but when you actually go on to the inside, it's just pedophilia. That's what it is.
First of all, an organization can't be just pedophilia. This is once again an example where you are just using words incorrectly. The word pedophilia just means attraction to children. You could say something like the organization is only just defense of pedophilia. Now that would be correct. I'm just saying that you should be a bit more precise and rigorous in how you are phrasing these things, but it's sort of irrelevant. Now, second of all, let's now just take a look at the Prostasia's about page. Let's go through some of the things they say about themselves, because it's very important to just basically hear their side, what they personally argue is their mission. All right, so I'm going to read out a couple of these sentences. Protecting children from sexual abuse is a cause that everyone can unite behind. Often, however, the measures we take to combat child sexual abuse are less effective than they should be because they are driven by emotion rather than evidence. First of all, we get this notion that they are against contact. All right, so they are against child molestation. This is an important point to realize. They want the methods to decrease child molestation to be effective. I think that's a good thing. It's a good thing to have effective methods. And they're not big fans of having those methods being driven by emotion, but rather they believe that they should be based on evidence. I think that sort of makes sense in my opinion. In striving to protect children from abuse, we may end up harming them and others. And that's not really what we want, clearly. So I think if we want to try to protect children, we should do that correctly. That's what they're saying. Agreed. Prostasia Foundation addresses this problem by helping to fund sound scientific research on child sexual abuse prevention. So they're for science. I think that's a reasonable position to have. Engaging with diverse stakeholders whose voices are not normally heard. Now, one could perhaps read from between the lines that they're talking about pedophiles here. But when you research what Prostasia is doing with pedophiles, is they are trying to help the pedophiles stay non-offending. So that's how they're engaging with those stakeholders if we want to see them as pedophiles or MAPs, all right? Addressing the human rights impacts of child protection laws and policies. I think it's a good thing. I believe in human rights personally, so basically adhering to human rights is important. Communicating the results of our research and engagement to policymakers, platforms, and the public. So they want to spread information and basically help further the progress of making society a safer place for children. And if this means that we are going to have to change slightly our attitudes toward pedophiles, maybe that's what we have to do. If we have to change some institutions or get rid of some of the institutions as ineffective, maybe that's also a good thing. I mean, these are the things that take place here. Nothing dramatic, I think.
It's supposed to be about protecting children, and it has a MAP support group, which if you want to join the MAP support group, keep in mind you have to be 13 years old, and it's just basically private chats for grown adults to have conversations with literal, like, children. So, yeah, it's really fucking gross.
The thing is, I would like to see some evidence that there are any private chats within the pedophile support group run by Prostasia, because I haven't seen any evidence like that, because that's not really how I think the support group works. It's peer support anyway, and the maps, the minors who might join the group, they have to be maps themselves as well, which is something Marchbaby just conveniently leaves out. They're going to be young maps who might be at the dire need of help, and the support group is there for that as well. So it's not just for the older pedophiles, it's for the younger pedophiles as well, for all of them to get help and be able to help each other out. And now, could there still be a risk involved? Now, I can see from a certain perspective how you could see that there might be a risk, until you realize that Prostasia has in fact hired real therapists for the specific task of moderating conversations in that support group. So even if there were private chats, they would equally be subject to that moderation. So I personally don't see any real risk at this point when we know these facts.
And on top of that, the people who even run Prostasia are people that are on this sex offender registry, so I don't think I need to explain myself anymore.
This is simply misinformation. It's based on outdated videos. Now, in the past, there were these two cases. Two people who were working with Prostasia or had some involvement with Prostasia, Guy Hamilton Smith and Jeff White, who had convictions, who were on the sex offender register. But when Prostasia found out about that, they immediately discontinued cooperating with them. And in fact, not only that, after those incidents, Prostasia implemented new screening policies to ensure that they will never ever work with such sex offenders anymore. So they handled the matter, and yet Marchbaby is sitting there implying as if the whole of the staff of Prostasia are just sex offenders, which couldn't be further from the truth. So in my opinion, for that statement alone, I think if Marchbaby had anything called spine, he would make an apology video just for that slander.
This organization is making attempts to get rid of the sex offender registry, which is, fitting. It makes fucking sense, obviously.
Well, it does make sense to get rid of the sex offender register. I mean, it's simply not functional if we go by anything called scientific findings. I don't really know what's the point of even using these studies, because the antis aren't really interested in these facts at all. It's clear by now, but I'm going to read out the results and conclusions here very briefly, because this is a recent meta-analysis which is very substantial. It investigated these findings over the course of 25 years. The random effects meta-analysis model demonstrated that sex offender registration and notification does not have a statistically significant impact on recidivism. This null effect exists when examining a combined model and when disaggregating studies by sexual or non-sexual offenses, or conceptualizing recidivism by arrest or conviction. Sex offender registration and notification policies demonstrate no effect on recidivism. This finding holds important policy implications given the extensive adoption and net widening of penalties related to sex offender registration and notification. Now, I think I could analogize these to, let's say, a hugely expensive dishwasher. You are to decide whether you are going to invest in a hugely expensive dishwasher, but the catch is, it doesn't wash your dishes. Why the fuck would you invest in a fucking broken dishwasher? It just makes no sense. It's the same thing.
But again, this organization is just straight up disgusting. It is vile. Now, I understand if it was an organization for bettering people who have these feelings.
And that's exactly why Prostasia has the peer support group for pedophiles.
For a good example, I guess I could just say, you know, pedophiles going to therapy, right? I mean, in general, just people who have these types of feelings with kids, going to therapy and getting help before you actually make a mistake or actually do something to harm a child is the best way to handle it. And I believe there are organizations that actually do that, but this organization is not one of those. It says it's for child care and child protection, but wants to accept maps, like basically the exact opposite of child care and protection.
And how exactly is it the opposite of childcare and protection to make pedophiles feel more comfortable seeking help when you get rid of the stigma? It would seem that that's something you need to do if you're going to say something like pedophiles should seek help. Well, then make a society where they feel comfortable seeking that help and they're not afraid of being further stigmatized, as studies show that they currently are.
I don't know how to fucking say this, but most of his videos are just the defense of maps. It says in the title, "My face when anti-pedos can't make arguments." I don't think you need to make an argument at all. You have already self-reported. If you're an anti-pedo, you are automatically in the right. Like I don't have to like explain myself. You are automatically in the right. You are a good person. Good job for being an anti-pedo.
Right, so you are a good person by making matters worse for everyone, including children, by driving maps under the ground, by cutting them off from sources of support. And it's sort of telling that you would think that you don't even need to justify yourself and make an argument for your position. I've been talking about in my videos that you antis don't really seem to have any kind of a rational justification behind your ideology, but I wouldn't have expected that we would find eventually a guy who just openly admits that it seems to be just a knee-jerk reaction to them, and that's all there is to that.
Now, if we are going to go into the deeper conversation of like lolicon and all that stuff, people who draw art of kids, I think you guys know my stance on that. Lolicon is pedophilia. I don't care if it's not real children. It is disgusting, and it just kind of, it's a big self-report. If you jerk off to lolicon, it is you self-reporting. You are attracted to minors.
Fine, let's say it's a self-report. Let's say you're admitting you're attracted to minors if you like that content. Let's say that for the sake of argument. Well, you still haven't explained where's the victim. Where's the harm? I mean, it would seem there's just as few victims in a lolicon as there are in the violent video game you are proudly displaying in the background.
But this guy's entire channel consists of basically making the argument that, oh, freedom of speech, we need freedom of speech. This guy has to be one of the biggest retards I've ever seen in my fucking life, because freedom of speech can only go so far. If you commit an act of terrorism, does that count as freedom of speech? Like, I don't understand. Committing a crime doesn't mean you should be allowed to do it because it's freedom of speech.
This is one of the instances where this guy just displays complete lack of knowledge of my positions and what my channel is even about, because it's not about freedom of speech. In most of my videos, I'm not talking about freedom of speech. That's a side subject at most. In the last two videos, I do talk about free speech though, because I'm discussing this controversy where Elon Musk suspended a map user for having designed a pride flag for maps. And for some reason, Marchbaby takes this as an example to imply that I don't think freedom of speech has any limits or rules or any boundaries, when that's a straw man. Of course I think there are limits, and why is he talking about terrorism in the context of a map designing a flag for maps? I mean, it would seem there's a difference between designing a fucking flag and committing a terrorist attack. You can't be this dumb to not realize that even. You can't support the idea of free speech without necessarily supporting any real crime or terrorism. It's not really that complicated to figure out what my stance on this is.
And the argument that he's making is basically a lot of instances is because of Twitter users getting banned because they're pedophiles, or they're talking about how maps should be protected. Granted, that doesn't exactly mean that the person is inflicting damage onto a real child, but openly admitting that you are a map, wanting to protect maps, and not doing anything about it is going to continue to accept them onto the platform.
That's right. If you're not going to do anything about maps who don't break the law, that means you're going to continue allowing them to use the platform. If you're not going to censor someone, you're not going to censor them. It literally means the same thing. Why did you bother pointing out something so obvious? And where have I admitted I'm a map? I mean, you keep repeating that claim an accusation, but by now you probably should have something like a quote or a time code where I say something like that. You just should probably confirm whether someone is a map before you make a public video and accuse them of being one. And it's not enough that you're just, idiotic subscriber of yours accused me of being one. You probably should do your own research and confirm that.
Brother, I don't think you understand the severity, right? If we just let maps onto Twitter and let them roam free like it meant nothing, then you will get what happened back when we had zoophiles on the fucking space. You're just gonna get a group of them that gang up on you and literally try to justify and defend zoophilia.
Now, the impression I get from this clip is basically that I think in the past there have been some zoophiles who have ganged up against this guy, and now he has been traumatized by that, I guess, because the zoophiles made comments, made arguments, and defended their ideology. That's the problem of allowing maps or zoophiles on these platforms, that they're going to end up making comments. And that's it. And talking of people ganging up against other people, I mean, have you been to the comment section of my first response to Shu? There are plenty of angry Shu fans ganging up against me, but I guess that's different, it's okay, even though they are the ones in fact inciting violence. The zoophiles aren't inciting violence, the maps aren't inciting violence, it's you guys, and I'm going to soon play the clip where you are doing that as well. Because it's okay for you guys to gang up against people, but when the maps and zoophiles just make their positions heard in this kind of a non-violent and peaceful manner, that's where you will draw the line and you want to censor them like the fascist you clearly are.
We're talking about Hypnotist Sappho here. She had an entire group of people who came to her defense and used places like Twitter to have access to literal children so she can try to get them to be zoophiles. I don't think it's that hard for a map to get children to quote-unquote listen to their side if they just had a platform on Twitter.
I don't think you can make kids be zoophiles. I don't think it works like that. To have a paraphilia, it's not exactly where you convince people that it's good to be a zoophile and then they become one. It's like just like you can't convince someone to be pedo and they just find kids attractive, because by this logic you could then reverse the whole process and you could make pedophiles non-pedophiles, that is telephiles. So it clearly doesn't work that way. I'm not exactly sure is it completely identical or analogous to be zoophile as it's to be pedophile, but it's sort of beside the point, because I don't think you can still sort of impose paraphilia like that just because you post a Twitter comment. Now, and by the way, I would like to see some evidence that these zoophiles he's talking about were specifically targeting children just because they were using a site that children also used. Like, there's a difference between using a site like YouTube where children have access to and specifically focusing on trying to brainwash or indoctrinate them. So I would like to see some evidence about that. And speaking of indoctrination, I mean, you're sort of looking in the wrong direction, in my opinion, because, for example, like religious upbringing would be something that I would certainly see a great issue with, like when it gets to this kind of a very aggressive indoctrination of children. And this is something that in fact happens in real life. There's no evidence that pedophiles on Twitter or anywhere are specifically trying to brainwash children, and kids aren't interested in politics anyway. You clearly don't know any children if you think they are all this interested about fucking debate about pedophilia or zoophiles. So I don't know, like you're again like completely, you're all over the place. You really don't, you haven't probably paused to think about your arguments through at all. You know, I understand that people are very triggered and they're very emotional about the subject of pedophilia. I understand this is fucking difficult as hell subject, and I can even sympathize if you hate pedophiles, you can't help it. You find them disgusting. This is all fine, but the problem for me is when you go onto internet or you go somewhere public and make statements that are false about pedophiles, that they're all molesters, they will all molest eventually given a chance, or they are all involved in some kind of a pro-contact conspiracy, even though they are, even when they say they're anti-contact. Like, these are the things I take issue with. I don't know really how to arrive at any kind of compromise here with a guy like Marchbaby when they really just, it seems that you can't really reason people out of a position when they haven't reasoned themselves into that position in the first place, and I think this is just an example of that.
Like I said, this guy has basically just continuously made videos on the argument of freedom, quote-unquote freedom of speech, and is constantly talks about pedophilia and the dangers of pedophilia and how it's not actually dangerous.
Whose channel are you talking about? I'm not constantly talking about the dangers of pedophilia and how it's not dangerous. There's literally one video where I discuss that topic of whether it's dangerous, and I'm not even saying that we can't consider it dangerous. We can, depending on how we conceptualize dangerousness as a concept. So that's not even the point I was making in that one video, that it's not dangerous. The point, if you watch the video, if you actually care to listen to what I have to say there, is that people who are anti-pedos and are appealing to dangerousness as a justification to demonize pedos are not consistent at all, because they don't have a problem with other dangerous groups whose dangerousness can be derived in the same way, such as being male, who statistically rape way more than women, or people who are poor, who with less to lose are more likely to commit all kinds of criminal conduct. But the antis don't see any problem with these groups, which means that their whole argument is just an excuse. It's not really something that can be used to justify demonization of pedophiles in particular.
I don't understand how this guy hasn't had his channel taken down or anything, because his entire channel is it's just straight up fucking pedophilia. Like, it is just defensive pedophilia.
Yes, you don't understand. That's the problem. I mean, you got something right. I mean, what I do here on YouTube is basically I'm arguing for my positions, what I hold, what I believe in, and one of those things is that I think not all pedophiles are criminals. There's a difference between having an attraction to younger people and acting on it in ways that harm others, which, by the way, is the thing I also believe is immoral. It's not immoral to have those feelings, but to act on them in ways that cause victims. We disagree clearly, but that's not even relevant, because what's relevant is that by believing in those ideas and even making videos about those ideas, that's not a YouTube guideline violation. And the irony here, of course, is that what is a YouTube guideline violation is what you are going to do in the next clip.
They shouldn't have a platform altogether. What they should have is a 9mm pressed against their temple.
Admittedly, we don't exactly know whether he meant to say that society should kill pedophiles, or whether he argues that pedophiles should kill themselves. Of course, he could appeal to something like, oh, he was just joking, I don't understand jokes. But then again, the thing about jokes is that just because you are making jokes doesn't mean they can't be offensive. Like, many people like to sort of masquerade their abuse of different minorities under the veil of it being humor. Well, it's still, you are just, at the end of the day, you are just being bigoted fuck. You're trying to be funny, but you're still spreading bigoted fucking hateful crap. But the thing about this whole of it being a joke is that as much as I despise people like Shoe on Head, at least she is somewhat funny in the sense that when she talks about she believing that there are multiple solutions for pedophilia, there's the 9mm, like, you can understand that it's just a joke. You can understand the structure of the joke. It's unfunny. You can see that it's humorous, the way she presents it. But what Marchbaby does here is that I don't think in any way it can be classified as humor or a joke, because it has no structure of a joke. It's not just that it's not funny, it's just that it literally can't be classified as joke. So I guess he really just believes pedophiles should be dead. Which then begs the question, why is his channel up and hasn't been taken down? I don't really care one way or the other. I'm not really the kind of person who goes flagging people's channels, whether they violate people's rules or not. I'm not really into that, but I'm just wondering.
And it makes you worry for general, like, kids in general. What if kids find stuff like this and start believing being a map is okay?
I think we've already gone through this. Kids aren't interested in politics, so in all likelihood they are not going to find my content. They will not find it entertaining. They probably won't understand what I'm saying, but on the off chance they find my channel, they find my videos, and let's say they even understand what I'm trying to say as opposed to your antis. So they might arrive at the same conclusion, or they might adopt my conclusion that there's a difference between being a pedophile and being a child molester. Why would that be a bad thing for them to grasp? Now, some of you or some antis might probably chime in and say something like, okay, but what if they're going to seek out pedophiles then? Why would they seek out pedophiles just because they learned from some guy that not all of them are criminals? That's not a reason to seek out some people. Perhaps you are going to continue that line of reasoning and say that, what if it's a truth or dare challenge? Well, even that makes no sense, because if it's going to be a truth or dare challenge, it would be a much more effective one if they actually didn't know that some pedophiles are law-abiding, because then it would make more sense to try to seek them out.
On Head's video, there is a point where somebody in a chat room says that when they were a minor, they found this stuff and they don't see anything wrong with it.
What this guy conveniently leaves out is that the minor in the screen capture on Shoe's video was a map themselves, and they willingly exposed themselves to this support group because they needed help. And in all likelihood, the guy got help. He learned to accept himself, which, by the way, is something that modern therapy for pedophiles also aims at. It's not about changing the orientation, which is immutable according to research again, but rather it's about, you know, invoking this kind of a sense of self-efficacy and making the pedophile feel their destinies in their hands, which it is. So essentially, the young map discovered something through the Prostasia support group that he would have learned anyway if he had gone to therapy, and therapy would have been successful. I really don't see the harm here, especially when you yourself argue pedophiles should get help. Now, when it comes to the possibility that some young maps might discover my channel and find my content, I do happen to have this perhaps a bit naive belief that some maps like that might actually find my content useful and helpful, because they would, for example, find out that not all people really want them dead. I mean, that's something. That's really something. Like, if you think everyone wants you dead and you find out there's one guy who doesn't, it's a good thing. It's a good thing for your mind, really. And I certainly do talk about the same issues where I argue that we should prevent these individuals from falling into the kind of a mindset where they think that their choices are irrelevant, which is the consequence if we do conflate the concepts of pedophile and child molester. When you argue that either way it's bad, you're really like pushing them to the direction you probably don't want to push them towards.
This is exactly the point that I'm making. If you expose more minors to stuff like this, you're just gonna convince them that fucking grown-ass adults is just gonna be this okay thing. It's disgusting.
And this is probably the biggest straw man of all. I will not waste much time on this. I will just merely point out that it's one thing to falsely accuse me of being a pedophile with no evidence, and it's another thing entirely to slander my position, to imply that I defend something I don't, and in this case, imply I'm for child molestation when I've explicitly denounced it. For example, take a look at my video where I discuss the difference between the terms child adult sex and child sexual abuse. It couldn't be more clear how I'm opposed to that behavior. There's no point in interacting with a person like you. You do realize that when you can't get even the basics of my positions right.
And a lot of these people use, like, the argument that, oh, nothing you say is logic, but trust me, guys, everything I say is logic. And then they use the argument that technically that means parents are pedophiles too, because they're grown adults hanging around children, so that means they're pedophiles.
Well, that's not even how the joke goes, but whatever. One guy made a joke, a silly joke, and this somehow means that all of the ideology of maps and their allies is now debunked. Yeah, I mean, speaking of being logical, I don't think that's really anything resembling logic, that reasoning you just employed there.
These people don't have any sort of logic within their brain. They don't use any logic at all. And a lot of arguments they like to use is that pedophilia is a sexuality, or that it should be considered in the LGBTQ. You do realize that fucking children isn't exactly like the same thing as like trans people or like bisexual people. That's not how that works.
Firstly, just a few words about comparisons and analogies in general. Like whenever people are comparing things, let's say comparing anything like pedophilia and homosexuality, or you're just comparing homosexuality and bisexuality, it doesn't matter which things you are comparing. There will always be differences, so they can never be exactly the same. That being said, Marchbaby is sort of making the suggestion here that we have a reason to exclude pedophiles from the LGBT because offending against children is so distinct from consensual sex between adults. Yes, I get that reasoning, but then again, we now only have reasoning to exclude offending pedophiles. We will still need a separate argument to justify excluding non-offending ones when it comes to whether pedophilia is a sexual orientation. Now, this is kind of a complicated topic, and it's not really even that interesting to me anymore. Like, it doesn't really matter what we call pedophilia, whether it's a paraphilia or sexual orientation. What the fuck does it matter? I mean, they're still human beings with human rights, and we should sort of appreciate that fact. But anyway, like depending how we define sexual orientation, we can consider it like a sexual age orientation, like Michael Cito has in his research paper. It just depends how you think about the term. I'm not dogmatic on it either way, and you probably should be. You shouldn't be probably either.
And it's worrisome that foundations like the Prostasia Foundation exist. Their literal existence is just to protect grown-ass adults' feelings for having and wanting to have sex with children. It's not to protect children. If anything, they haven't done anything to actually protect children. Their entire purpose is basically to just support maps, which is not protecting children. It's doing the exact opposite.
I'm going to use this clip as a way to basically wrap up this video, even though I'm aware I have mostly responded to everything here. So again, to recap, Marchbaby, I don't think you can complain about Prostasia offering support for pedophiles when you yourself said that the best thing is for pedophiles to get help. Well, that's exactly what Prostasia is there for. You are being inconsistent. You openly admit you don't need arguments or justifications for your positions. You strawman me, you don't watch my videos, you don't play my videos. In case you see any merit in continuing this exchange or whatever this is, I just recommend that you just cut off this personal crap. You listen to my theories and arguments. Preferably you read the studies I cite and then you explain what's the problem with them. I mean, it's not like I can't change my mind, but you have to understand that when you are saying something like I'm a pedophile, or you complain about my thumbnails, or you're just whining just in general that my channel is up and not censored just because what I say is, I don't know. I really don't understand how what I say can be that distressing to anyone, really. Like, if you are listening to this and you are not the fascist, how could anything I say be that fucking distressing? But anyway, like, if you want to continue this exchange, fine. But you will have to try to deal with my positions rather than attacking me as a messenger. Okay, can you do that? That's all I have. Thanks for listening.